Hello again. In this series on World War II special units, we started off, the first review we did was on the book on SOE by Professor Foot, who really you could say is the official historian of SOE. And his work really is the standard by which all others are judged. And even though since his book, there's been a lot of official files released and there's a lot more access to the archives than he was allowed. And so some of the subsequent histories have fleshed out things a lot, but they almost all have to refer to Professor Foot's work. And the book I'm going to talk about today is his autobiography, Memoirs of an SOE Historian by MRD Foot. And it's a really interesting book because he had an interesting life. He was at Oxford and then World War II broke out, and he was called up and he was serving in an anti-aircraft battalion when he eventually his education was recognized and he was commissioned into Combined Operations Headquarters, which was the organization at the time under Mountbatten, which directed commando and similar raids onto the enemy territories. And one of the things he used to do was communicate with different organizations, including SOE, and he mentions phoning F section and speaking to the same officer, same voice, but always under different names. They were using cover names all the time. One of the raids he was involved in, he was involved in the planning and then briefing the raiding party on an attack on a Norwegian port led by Lieutenant John Godwin, Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve. Unfortunately, almost the entire party were captured and ended up in Sachsenhausen concentration camp, where they were made to test German army boots by marching around a cobbled street for 14 hours a day. Obviously crippling exercise, but they used to sing songs and keep the spirits up. And then because they were commandos, they were scheduled to be executed. And as they were being led to the execution, Godwin thought, well, this is it. And he grabbed a pistol off one of the escorts and killed him. He was immediately riddled himself, but died fighting rather than just being stood against a wall. So after Combined Operation Headquarters, Professor Foot joined the SAS as an intelligence officer. And amongst others, he met Paddy Mayne, Brian Franks, all the senior guys. He talks about that. He had to go through parachute training, but he couldn't get on the normal course. So he was sent to do the course with the SOE, which involved a lot of secrecy, being driven around in the back of a blacked out vehicle so that he wouldn't know where he was. And so he qualifies, gets his wings, and he's on operations in France and he's captured by the Germans. He's in uniform, but there's some debate about what to do with him, and he speaks German, and you can hear the debating: is he a terrorist, in which case he'd be shot, or if he's just a regular soldier. And luckily, they accepted the fact that he was just from the airborne forces, and he wasn't shot out of hand. Then after the war, he goes back to being a historian, and amongst other things, he gets invited by the Foreign Office to write a partial history of SOE. Prime Minister Macmillan had ordered the Foreign Office to produce a history of one of the sections, and it was decided that France would be the one. And he was given access to the archives under supervision and in a location which he still to this day can't name, and started putting things together. He wanted to interview the agents and officers from SOE, but the Foreign Office, in other words SIS, didn't think this was a good idea. And he had been invited to join the Special Forces Club due to his membership in SOE, and suggested that he take up the membership and then he'd meet all these guys. And he was told that SIS would veto his membership. So he was eventually allowed to meet Gubbins, then Vera Atkins, and a couple of the agents. But he didn't meet Buckmaster, who was head of F section, until after the book had been proofed. Then, only after the book was finalised and was published, was he allowed to join the Special Forces Club. I think I mentioned before, it caused a certain amount of consternation, because there were people who'd written their biographies and so on, and the facts as unearthed by Professor Foot clashed with some of what had been said by some of the agents. Later, he cooperated with Jimmy Langley over a book on MI9, the Escape and Evasion Service. And he appeared on TV and numerous documentaries about SOE, many of which I saw. And he always was very articulate and kept the discussion really on factual tracks. Towards the end of the book, there's a big chapter, Reflections on SOE, which I won't try to précis, because it really does deserve reading in entirety. Obviously, he is one of the major figures in the research of Special Operations Executive and other secret organizations, and all of his books have been worth reading, including his autobiography.